Some people in this world are on the front lines of the struggle between good and evil, and some, like us, bear witness. I'm Therese Apel.
And I'm Nicole Crowell. You may have heard us as we worked on stories and series about law enforcement and crime. And it's safe to say we've seen some of the best and worst of human nature.
We decided there's no greater honor than bringing you the stories of the men and women who seek out the monsters, who speak for the victims, and who put the pieces together on some of the biggest Mississippi crime stories of our time.
Welcome to Investigation Homicide.
Hey everybody, welcome to Investigation Homicide. I am Therese Apel, and this week we have Nicole Crowell back with us.
Yay! I'm back, finally.
We
My
missed you.
life has been so busy. I'm so sorry. I apologize. But I'm back now.
Well, hopefully
ready.
people are binging so they only missed you for an hour and not like 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That's true. It feels like a lot longer, like in my head.
Right.
It's just been so much going on. So I feel like I haven't been here in a month, but I'm glad to be back.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I'm glad you came back for this one.
Yes.
Because this is a pretty big case that we've got going on today. Many of you know that one thing that we have done consistently, I think, is bring back some of the old cases that you know if you have lived in Jackson for any amount of time or lived around Jackson for any amount of time. We've talked about Annie Laurie Heron and Daphne Tullis. We've talked about several of these kind of cases. Well, today we have another case that I know most of you will remember just by name when I say it. So we're talking about Mary Heather Spencer. You may know about the organization named after her, Heather's Tree, and they still post on Facebook. This is not something that happened and went away. And I get emotional talking about it because I remember it happening. I remember, the ones of us that were around at the time in that age group, you just can't forget that it happened. So we're here to talk about Heather Spencer, and we've got Derrick Jordan with us. He is now a director at the Department of Public Safety, and at the time, you were a detective at JPD. Now, tell us a little bit about your career. What brought you here?
Oh, first of all, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We're excited.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. Again, my name is Derrick Jordan, and 25-year law enforcement veteran. And my career started in Jackson Police Department, where I rose through the ranks from patrol to a detective. And then I was the supervisor in homicide, a sergeant of homicide. Had the opportunity to be on the FBI task force for a number of years and come back to Jackson and provide some services as well. And in addition to that, I've had experience with the Attorney General's office in Medicaid fraud and also with the District Attorney's office. But just recently, before this position I'm in now, I served for a few years as Assistant Chief at Capitol Police. So now I am one of the directors out at the Mississippi Department of Public Safety Standards and Training. I oversee the accreditation department.
Great.
That's quite the resume.
Right. Well, and one thing so we've had Sheriff Tyree Jones in here, and one of the things that I still remember, there was one day, because of course, and I've told the story before, but when I was a baby reporter, you guys were the big detectives. So I would go to these crime scenes and I'd see them across the crime scene tape and be like, wow, they're like heroes. And so there was one day, there had just been a body laying in the road. And so you guys were out there and y'all were just talking to each other, and I took this picture of y'all, and I think the body was in the background, so I knew I wasn't going to use it for anything news-wise, but to me it was like, it's like I just captured this.
Huh? I still have that picture.
Yeah, okay, good. I knew I
still
sent
have
it to you.
Yes.
So, but to me, that was a whole thing. We're like, oh my gosh, this is a moment in time, which is funny because now I'm friends with you guys. But it was a very big deal.
Well, like what you said earlier, they're like, she was telling the story earlier, and it was, you were these big heroes and all. And she's like, now you're just guys.
So we lost
now
our
you're just
our
dudes.
glory.
Now you're just
Y'all
my
are
friends. Now you're just my friends. Sorry.
Yeah, Tyree, if you're watching, you're still a hero too.
You are all still heroes.
Oh, thank you.
Don't worry.
So before we get started, let me just remind you that if you're watching on Facebook, if you're watching live, you can post questions or comments or whatever like that. We'll see them and we'll be able to answer them live. We do know this is a strange time to be watching. So if you are watching after the fact or listening to the podcast, you can still send in questions. And if we happen to see them, then we will answer them. Sometimes that's hit or miss.
If there's enough, we'll do a part 2.
Right, exactly.
How about that?
So, okay, let's go back to, it was September 10th, 2007, correct?
I think it was September 11th.
September 11th, okay. So I think you're right about that now that you say it, because September 11th is
I feel
always
like
a significant
it was
day.
always like September 10th through September 11th because it was like early morning hour.
Right,
That's true.
right. So tell me about let's just start with you chronologically. When do you get the call and what happens?
So we're actually in the office. It's just a normal day, doing work providing our services that we do for the citizens of Jackson. And around 11, a little after 11, we get a call of the SWAT. It was a SWAT activation at Northside Drive and McWillie. I think it was at the BP at the time. And there was a gentleman in the car who was threatening suicide. Unbeknownst to us that at the same time this was an active scene when SWAT was activated, there were a male and a female who flagged down some officers in the Precinct 4 area, and the male advised the officer that, hey, on Trawick Drive, we think there's been a murder. So we have two active scenes at the same time, not knowing that they were connected until we actually arrived on scene.
So before we go any further, let me go ahead and warn you that this case is one of the most graphic, one of the most disturbing cases of domestic violence and I didn't cover it as a reporter at the time, but that I've been aware of or covered in any way. So if you have if you're sensitive, there will be times that you don't want to listen to this. You want to make sure your kids are maybe tucked somewhere else. So you've got this male and this female in this car. He's threatening suicide. How do you find out who he is and what happens next?
So just to kind of like set the scene, at the BP gas station, again, there's a male in the car. He's armed with a firearm. He's threatening suicide. You have officers who are in contact with two citizens, and they're telling them that, hey, on Trawick Drive, there's a body in the house. There's been a homicide. So at the time, the late Sergeant Eric Smith, he called me. He's like, hey, D, I need you to respond out here with me. So we get to the house, and once we open the door, when we entered the door, all we could see was blood. In the hallway, the bedroom, the kitchen, the foyer, there was blood. There's blood everywhere. And as we did a safety check of the house, we located the body inside the bedroom. I mean, she was nude, but she was covered with with some towels, but she didn't have on any clothes. And it was obvious that she had extensive blunt force trauma to the head. And there was a flashlight, a bloody flashlight beside her body. The residents of the house, the resident who flagged the police down, who advised us of this information, gave us information that the gentleman who was at the BP gas station was responsible for this and had made contact with one of those citizens who flagged down the police, and they were able to give us detailed information about what occurred the night prior to leading up to this incident.
Now, so we know that one thing that you guys should know about this case is that it never went to trial. So there are details that just really aren't out there that much, but it's public record. And so one thing that we know from those public records is that the witnesses that you had at this point were the suspect's uncle.
Correct.
And the victim's roommate.
Correct.
Talk about how the roommate got involved in this situation.
So again, like I said, it's like 11, or maybe around 11:30 when we get the call and we respond to the house, and the roommate advised us that the suspect arrived at her house around 7:30 a.m. and he was acting real strange, and he was telling her that, hey, I've done something really bad. I've killed the only person that I loved, and he was armed. And during that time, there was some drug use in her presence. So she knew that he was acting real erratic and just not normal. And at that time, armed with the firearm, he tried to force her to perform oral sex, and she refused. That's when he got her, put her in the car, and carried her back to the original crime scene, because he advised her that, hey, my mom is at the house, it's okay. But she was terrified. She did not want to get out of the car until she saw his mother. So when the mom walked out of the house and she came in the house, and that's when she saw all the blood and she saw the body.
Nicole, can you imagine being in her position?
No, because they always when you were telling that story, it's like the thing is like never let them take you to a second location. Right. Never let them take. And I can imagine like that drive is like, what is about to happen to me? And he's already told her that something terrible happened. And I think the confusing part of the whole thing, like as I was reading everything, I was like, wait, it took me a second to realize everything was happening at the same time first.
Right.
And then even when you start the story, it's like you start the story here, but then you kind of have to go backwards. And then you finally realize why we're here.
Right.
it's like a movie.
It is.
And like all of these different moving parts. So I had to go back and reference who was who, and they all have the same last name
Yes.
because they're all related.
Right.
And I think that it was just like actually creating a story in my head, or like a map in my head of like, okay, this person's related to this person's related to this person, and now, okay, so who is this girl? And then placing her into it, and then finally at the very end, I was like, okay, I have a full story.
Right.
Right.
But it is very confusing if you're just kind of telling the story. You have to kind of skip around. But I can't imagine being her. I can't imagine being any of these people. I don't know. I feel bad for her because she really like was just there. She was just existing. She really had nothing to do with any of this. And she got pulled into it, and now she has all of this trauma. This was her roommate. This was probably her really, really good friend, if not best friend.
Right.
And she had to not only see her blood everywhere, and probably maybe her body. I don't think she saw her body in the house.
I don't know if she actually saw the body,
Yeah.
but you couldn't help but to see the blood.
Yeah,
Because the scene was bloody. And at this time, I think it was, like I said, it was 2007. I think I'd been a homicide for like 4, maybe 5 years. I've seen a lot of scenes, but this one here was very graphic. The nature of the body, the condition of the body, the trauma to the body, and all of the blood.
Now, introduce us to the suspect. Who is he?
So the suspect was identified as George Bell, I want to say the third. Yes, George Bell the third. Very prominent family in the community. Very affluent neighborhood where they were residing, where the scene. When we walked in the house, it was something strange about the whole scene. Remind you, I talk about the blood, I talk about the trauma to the body, but there were welcome home banners in the living room and like the den area where the night before. That's why you said the 10th, because the night before they were having a welcome home celebration for him because he was just coming home from rehab.
And why had he gone to rehab?
During the course of the investigation, we learned that he went to rehab for drug usage.
Sure. Now, prior to going to rehab, though, had there been other incidents of domestic violence with them?
Yes, there was another incident of domestic violence prior to him going to rehab that we learned after the fact as well.
Well, and I think I read that Heather Spencer had ended up with 51 staples in her head after that.
Yes.
So this was a guy that will beat you in the head, and we knew this at this point.
Right.
So let's go back to where we were. You're on the scene now.
Okay.
And you've got this body that is so traumatized, and you've got this scene. What is going through your mind as an investigator? Because like you said, 4 years on the job, this is the worst you've seen so far. I hate to be that. What emotions are you having, person? But seriously, I'm trying to put myself in your place, and it's like, what goes through your mind?
So it's kind of hard to say you set your emotions to the side because you train, you have a skill set, you train for the job, but again, you're human, and so you do have those realistic emotions when you investigate these type of cases. So you have to kind of like dial it down for a minute, because at that time it's not about you, it's about that victim, and it's about their family and getting justice and finding out exactly what happened, so we can build the best case. Collect all the evidence that we can, so we can get the person that's responsible, make sure that they go to trial and get convicted for what they're doing. So it gave us an energy almost, we get that extra energy, that extra boost, like, okay, we're here, we know this is bad, but let's work.
It felt like in reading the public records on this case that, I mean, there were so many names in there that I knew of investigators and crime scene, detectives and that kind of thing. I guess to me, it felt like all hands were on deck for this.
Yeah, it was. All hands was on deck. So at the time, now remind you, we're at the house and we're collecting the evidence. The scene at the gas station is still occurring. It's still occurring. That was a 4-hour deal.
At what point did y'all realize that the two things were connected?
So when we made it to the house and we were able to talk with the roommate, and she was giving us information on her initial statement and when she told us who it was, and then we knew we had a gentleman at the BP, and the plates from the car and all that stuff matched the house and residence. So we knew who he was at that time.
Sure. And I mean, obviously I know as a reporter, when you have something like that, like, oh, we've got a scene, oh, we got another scene. And then all of a sudden it's like you have that aha moment, like, oh, these are connected. You know, does it work like that for you guys too? Kind of
Well,
like we got a bigger picture than we thought?
It's always good when there's a connection early on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that whole first 4-day thing is it's kind of true.
Yeah.
So it's always good when there's a connection early on. And so we were able to pinpoint things to, we knew where the crime scene were, but we had multiple crime scenes because we had the scene at the house, we had the scene at the gas station, and then there was her house. That's a crime scene as well because he went there and he kidnapped her. He did some things there as well. So in the actuality, you have 3 scenes.
Right.
Right.
So at what point? So and talk to us about when he takes the roommate to the house.
Mm-hmm.
How do he and his mom end up leaving that scene and the roommate stays?
So when he took the roommate to the house, the uncle, which was an attorney.
Right, because the mom had called the uncle.
Right.
And the uncle showed up. This is my understanding, right?
Yeah, you're on
from
it.
my puzzle, from my little puzzle. The son was freaking out. Mama called an attorney. He didn't want to turn himself in.
Correct.
Mama called her brother,
Brother-in-law.
his
Brother,
uncle.
Right.
He's an attorney. He came over. Bell went to go. He said he was going to go buy Gatorade
And cigarettes.
Right. And instead he went to go kidnap her.
Right.
Came back, and then he wanted to talk to the uncle.
Right.
And the mama out back as counsel.
Right.
And so when counsel came back in and he still didn't want to turn himself in, he took the roommate, and the uncle took the roommate.
That's
and
when
left.
the flag. That's
and
when
that's
the flag.
the two people that flagged the people
put it
down.
Correct.
And this was the whole thing. I was like, what is going on?
Right.
Who are these people? And why are they all related? You know?
Yeah.
It's
Well,
like-
and this is where it really is like a movie because you have the uncle coming in saving the roommate.
yes,
being
you're
like, "We're
right.
getting out of here."
Exactly.
But then didn't the uncle end up being one of the representatives as the case went on? He represented George Bell.
He did. I think initially he did, but I think there was a change later on. But I think he initially did.
Feels like that would be a conflict of.
Well,
As
maybe
a
not.
witness
I don't
versus-
know.
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
But the
You s-
roommate at the house, to answer your question, she was provided very detailed information, and the uncle gave us some, as counsel, he gave us as much information as he could
Sure.
without divulging too much. But we were able to make those connections and corroborate what they were saying based on what we were already seeing, and so we was positive we had the right guy.
So one of the things that was just chilling to me as I looked over this case, because I mean, I knew about it. I had read the details years ago, but just to refresh my memory, I almost called this episode Number 9 because the piece of evidence that was labeled Number 9 was a piece of her skull.
Okay.
So you've got this whole story, like you're just looking at this list of what was collected at the crime scene. You've got shorts with underwear in them. You've got, the flashlight. It's tracking, sounds just like a murder investigation. But to someone who doesn't do this a lot, then all of a sudden, boom, a piece of the victim's, I think it said the complainant's skull.
Right.
And so I stopped and I was like, complainant. I understand that means victim and that we're using that word for some reason that has to do with law enforcement. But they just logged in a piece of her head as evidence. And that's part of that's how it works. There's nothing weird about that. But all of a sudden you have a little glimpse into how serious this beating was.
So the beating was so severe, the trauma to the body, the majority of the trauma was to the head area. Blunt force trauma. I think it was some type of cranial, cerebral, some big technical term that they use for the official cause of death. But if you've ever been to an autopsy, there are different segments during the autopsy. This way make it a little graphic, but part of the autopsy is to get a sample of tissues from vital organs. That includes like the brain. So they will peel your skull back, and then they'll take the saw and they'll cut your skull open and all that. So when they peel the skin off her head to do that, her skull just collapsed.
Yeah.
I've never seen that before. I mean, it just collapsed.
Yeah.
It just collapsed on the table.
And the thing about that to me is that I just can't picture how much. I mean, if you say rage, like we have all felt rage and we understand that. This is like so much evil that you would just do that to somebody that you say you love. And for those of you, I would suggest that you Google Heather Spencer. And I'm not trying to do the whole, Lacey Peterson effect or anything, but she was just beautiful. She was just such a pretty girl. And the idea of finding her in that situation makes it, just kind of it's all very sobering. So, okay, you're working the crime scene. You've done that part. What comes next?
So while we're working the crime scene, so we had the uncle and the roommate transport to police headquarters. So we had a different set of investigators there. They're gathering information, getting intel, getting statements and stuff while they're there, relating to us in the field real time so we can help corroborate what's going on while we were there. And one thing that stood out to me was the fact that it was 7:30 when he went to her residence. Once we had the autopsy and the coroner arrived on scene, well, prior to the autopsy when the coroner arrived on scene, Sharon, she was giving us a time frame, based on the condition of the body. She can tell whether they've been deceased for X amount of hours.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, X amount of hours. So
It was like 4 hours or something, right?
yeah, it was probably longer than that. So that was just her estimation. But she mentioned the 10th. The night prior, there was the party for him.
Mm-hmm.
And so we was thinking, what happened? A party is a joyous occasion, in my opinion. Of all the parties I've gone to, they've been joyous. So what could have occurred to make this individual, what circumstances happened to make this occur?
Mm-hmm.
So through the course of the investigation, we learned that during that party, there were, again, he was coming home from rehab. But during the course of the investigation, we learned that even while at rehab, he was still indulging in illicit drugs.
Mm-hmm.
So when he came home to the party, his welcome home party, there was a time where he and Heather were alone, and this is what he told the roommate, that he asked her for oral sex and she refused. He was in a rage. He went in a rage, and that's when things occurred. And the flashlight that I mentioned earlier is what was the weapon that was used to strike her in the head all those times. But not only was the flashlight used to strike her in the head, it was also used to sodomize her as well. So it was a graphic scene, very graphic.
And I think, to me, the reason that, and it was a hard decision whether or not we were going to address those details, but the fact is Heather Spencer had pressed charges on him prior to this. And at some point he convinced her that he was trying to do better. He had gone to rehab. I think there was some talk of religion in there, and she had dropped the charges. And so we've talked on this podcast before about domestic violence. And that's what Heather's Tree does, is it's about domestic violence awareness. So that's, to me, having been in a domestic violence situation, I think it's always important to know just how in danger you can be in those situations. So, okay, we now know that you guys have gone to the station. How do you put the case together after this? You've got your suspect. This isn't a whodunit.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you make this something that, like, okay, we're going to make this kid, he's not even going to want to go to court?
I mean, our at the time, it was always our position to, even after her arrest, and we know who the suspect is, we continue to work. We continue to gather evidence. We continue to find any other witnesses that may corroborate what we initially found. Anything, something that we miss. Oftentimes, after an individual's been arrested, you'll be surprised at the people who will come out after the fact and tell you, well, yeah, I saw this, or I saw that, or I knew this, or I knew that. So it's never over. And so we continue to put the case together. We continue to build the case based on the evidence and based on our witnesses and cooperations of everything. And we prepared a nice case for the district attorney's office for the grand jury. I went before the grand jury, testified, and he was indicted on the case.
So at some point you guys come back and you charge the mother with something.
Yes.
Talk about that.
So I told you that the 7:30 was important to me.
Mm-hmm.
The 7:30 was important to me. And I felt like from 7:30 to 11, a party the night before, and I know this occurred the night before. This is my theory. This occurred the night before, prior to. So what was he doing from the time of the party until 7:30 in the morning so he realized that, hey, I need to go and I need to get out of here or do whatever. I don't know what he's thinking, where his mindset is at the time. But that was very important to me. In addition to that, the crime scene. We always evaluate, process the crime scene and how we can corroborate the crime. So what we have, what we see with what we have, how accurate this is. The one thing that stood out to me, there were bloody feet print throughout the crime scene. But our suspect George was a big guy,
Mm-hmm.
and there were also bloody drag marks where you can see where something or someone has been were dragged. So my working theory at the time, the drag mark belonged to the victim.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The bloody feet print was not his size. So who else was there at that moment who didn't call the police, who didn't notify, or you try to get help?
Right.
So my working theory was it was the mom.
Right.
So I had a talk with Sergeant Smith at the time. I was telling him about my theory, and he was like, "You think so?" He's like, "How are you going to prove it?" I said, "I'll tell you what I'm going to do." So I had just recently come from a crime scene reconstruction class at Quantico.
Yeah.
And I said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to get a search warrant for her feet, for an impression of her feet. So the crime scene investigator had them to go out. They took the pictures, did the measurement of the feet. Got a search warrant for the impression of her feet. They brought her to she came with her attorney. They rolled her feet just like you would fingerprint back in the day.
Yeah.
She stepped on clean surface. We collected it, sent it to the lab, perfect size.
Wow.
I love it.
Yeah.
And at that point, I told Eric what I had, and he was like, wow. I said, so she was there.
Right.
She was there. She didn't call to get help. She didn't seek anything, call the police in the medical conditions. I said, I don't know what time, but she was there. Presented to the judge for a warrant for accessory, and he granted it.
Good.
Also came back and went before the grand jury and presented to them, and then indicted on the charge.
Now, I can't remember if I read or not. How much time did she end up serving for that?
Well, the case never went to trial,
Mm-hmm.
and because George pled, so he pled to the charge, and
Mm-hmm.
he received life. And I think as a condition of his plea, they dropped the charges against the mom.
So the mom. I have a lot of questions about the mom, right? So somewhere it said, I only read like those documents that were released, right? Because
Okay.
they were court documents, right?
Right.
So I figured they would be the most accurate. So somewhere it said that she had said that she came back to that scene early in the morning, right? Allegedly. She came back to that scene early in the morning. And then I missed the part that they were having a party the night before. So that's new information to me that I just learned, right? So in my brain, I'm like, okay, this mama was clearly there for the party because it's her son's party. And I'm assuming the party lasted to a good bit of the night. And then what you want to tell me is you left your own home in the middle of the night. Where did you go? And then you just happened to come back to a bloody crime scene? That's what you want to tell me?
Basically.
And that's what she told y'all, isn't it?
And I didn't believe it just like you don't believe
Okay, good. I'm so glad.
Right.
So, but you can't really like, besides the footprint, is that enough? Would that have been enough proof if it did go to trial?
I don't know,
think?
but
Or,
at the time, it
like-
was my position and my theory, and how could I prove it? Well, I could prove she was there. It was her home. Plus, she was there.
did we have cell phone pings back then?
We did, but technology has evolved so much now
Yeah.
than at that time in 2007. So I don't even think that we were even looking at
Yeah.
at that.
Yeah. Or if like, I'd be like, are there fingerprints on her? Like the mom's fingerprints on the victim's wrists, or if she was dragging her, or I don't know. Like,
Right, and then
it's
you had
just
to
that story never sat well with me.
right.
That's all I'm going to say about it.
It didn't sit well with me, and it didn't sit well with the grand jury as well.
Yeah.
So
I don't blame him.
I just thought it was enough probable cause to make her have to answer to that within itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and so do you feel like had this gone to trial, were we looking at a capital case here? I
Yes.
mean, it feels like it should have been capital murder.
Yes.
Do you feel like it would have been better had it gone that way?
I don't know. I mean, the emotional trauma
Yeah.
that would have resurfaced from the families and the victim's family, and even the suspects, even his family, because not only is the victim's family affected by this, his family is affected by it, their loved ones also. Again, they're a prominent family in the community, and they're doing great things. So I mean,
Mhm.
that's a black eye on them. So
Well, and so when you look back, I mean, we talked about how this was 4 years into your career.
Mhm.
What did it look like after to where you are now? Is it still one of the worst that you saw?
I think it ranks up there among the worst as far as the trauma to the body. I think that was like one of the worst. Gunshot victims, you kind of get accustomed to seeing those, but
Yeah.
this physical blunt force trauma was different. It ranks up there among one of the worst, outside of the gentleman, the one where we had the severed head.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I was that we
Is it
just
that
passed
one?
that anniversary, as a
Yes.
matter of fact.
Is it the one I'm thinking of too?
Yeah, the one that
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
so-
one was. Sorry, that was one of my traumatizing moments of like Therese was like, "Are you ready to see? Are you ready? Do you want to hear about this?" I was
Yeah.
like, "Am I ready?" Because she'll warn me before she tells me a story,
Mhm.
and she's like, "It's pretty bad." I'm like, "Okay," so I can prepare myself because I don't get emotional, but I'm just like, "Oh, all right, that's a little much for me." But yeah, that was a bad one. I
Yes.
want to go back to the BP.
Okay.
Okay, so we talked last week. Y'all did a really, really, really wonderful episode, and I was so sad I couldn't be here about negotiators.
Yeah.
And this was a 4-hour negotiation.
Correct.
Quote unquote, is it standoff?
Yeah.
Culturally appropriate here, but George is in the car.
Mhm.
He left the home with his mother, correct?
Correct.
She was in the car with him, and then police intervened, and she was able to get out of the car.
Right.
And then she was in a police officer's car as y'all were kind of. Was she a part of that negotiation process at all?
Yes. Anytime you have a someone who's involved in some type of hostage type situation, they're released and they have pertinent information they can give to the negotiation. That negotiation thing it's a life-saving technique. It's not for everyone, but it's a life-saving technique, and that's what saved his life that day. The skill set of those negotiators. I think Lieutenant Gerald Jones was one of the negotiators. I know he was one of the negotiators on the scene. Very well known, very well respected during that time as a negotiator. A lot of experience, and oftentimes when people see or they see the SWAT team is activated, they think about the military style weapons and all the equipment that we have, being a former SWAT guy. But all those things are life-saving measures that we use because the first priority is to save life. And the negotiation piece is a very important piece of that. And that was one of the things that saved his life. Yes, the mom could provide information to the negotiators so they'll know what they're dealing with and how to address the individual,
Now, in the end, what was his deal that day? I know that he was doing some drugs. Was there also anything else going on?
Outside of the drugs, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm really not sure outside of the drugs because once he surrendered into police custody, he was transported to police headquarters where I advised him of his Miranda rights, and he invoked the fifth, and so he decided not to provide a statement on advice of his counsel, and he was transported and charged at that particular time. So we never really got a chance to talk to him again about what was going on with him, his state of mind, what occurred to make him act in such a manner that he did.
So at this point, I'd Googled him, of course, to see like what's going on now, and he had been moved at some point from Parchman to CMCF.
Okay.
They were saying something along the lines of he's now an inmate pastor, and I think Burl Cain said that he felt like he was a good influence on people now rather than a bad influence, and he wanted to move him to a place where they needed more inmate pastors. And I'm just going to go ahead and say I don't always understand some of the tactics being used sometimes by MDOC as they invalidate or there's a lot of things riding on an inmate saying, no, I'm good now. And like one thing that they're doing is if you were a gang member and you say, oh, I'm not a gang member anymore, they take you off the gang member list. So I feel like you can say, hey, I'm a inmate pastor, and they're okay, good. And that was addressed in one of the articles that I read.
Yeah, I just saw that recently. I want to say I saw that recently. Someone had some concerns about him being moved. Now they do have those programs. I don't know a lot about those programs and how they validate those programs, if those programs work, and what measures they're using to measure the success of those programs. But we do know there are success stories that do come from those type programs. In this case, I'm not sure because I don't have knowledge of that. So I'm not.
Well, and the thing is, I always go back to the case of Carla Faye Tucker, like years and years and years ago in Texas. George W. Bush was the the governor of Texas, and she was on death row. She became a Christian. She was, ministering across the board. Everyone said, "Oh, this is actually a real thing." And George Bush had to make the decision: do we execute her anyway? And he did choose to go ahead and execute her because he's like, we cannot set a precedent. So I think that's the quandary that you come into sometime in these cases is like, is this person actually rehabilitated? And does that change their status when it comes to actually paying for what they did? And so when he was moved, that's what I was reading, was just that there was some concern about, is this real or not? And in the end, what can you do about it either way?
Right.
You know?
Right.
But he was given life in prison?
Yes.
Plus 30 years, correct?
Yes.
So he's going to be in there no matter what. He's
Correct.
just going to be pastoring up in there, huh?
Right.
Okay.
Well, and I think the concern was it's not quite as maximum security. I mean, it's not
Okay.
quite as secure as Parchment.
Where is he? CM
At CMCF? So he's right down the road.
Central
in-
Mississippi.
Yeah, he's in Pearl. Yeah,
CM Correctional Facility. Here we
Right.
go.
good. So Derrick, talk to us about this kind of criminal. I mean, you've seen all kinds of criminals. You've seen all kinds of abusers, that kind of thing. Does he fit? I mean, and I realize each one is an individual, but does he fit a category that you've seen or that you could iterate at all?
I wouldn't say a specific category, but the circumstances surrounding events. Anytime there's drugs and there is a history of domestic violence, as such as they had together, there normally is not a good ending. So he fits in that category for that because of the circumstances of the events. Categorizing him as a person and trying to put him in a category, I don't think that's fair, because I think on any given day, he'll probably be a different person if he wasn't under the influence.
Sure.
So
It seems to have, like, how long were they together for?
I don't know.
Okay, so was there any prior? Did you ever find any stories of any abuse prior in their relationship, except for the one that we know of where she got the 50-something staples in her head? It seems like it typically does not go, you're perfectly fine, and then you have 51 staples in your head. Did her mom ever come forward and say, yes, there were some times that maybe this was questionable or he had questionable behavior? Did anything come out like that?
I can't recall the mom ever coming forward talking about his behavior. Now, the 51 staple incident, that was the first documented incident that we were aware of.
What would we hear these stories over and over and over again. And we ask the same questions, but just to hear different versions of it, if it kind of clicks differently for different people, if you find yourself in a situation like this and you're at the beginning, you don't have the staples in your head yet, but you think that maybe you could get there one day. What steps should you take, or should you look out for? Or when it happens, what should you do and what should you not do?
I think that the best thing to do is for individuals. There are so many groups out here now that provide services and guidance in those type of areas. So many professionals that provide services and guidance. So many therapists that can provide services and guidance. That if a situation occurs like that, to seek that type of help. That professional help, I think, is the best. Listening and talking to your friends, that's one thing. But that professional help is the best. It's the best to guide you, because those professionals have dealt with this on a level that you haven't seen before. They've dealt with those families who've lost loved ones because of this, just like in this incident right here. So seeking that professional help, I think, is the best.
So is it fair to say, I mean, it's like you look for different things. Of course, there's the lethality risk assessment thing that they do and that kind of thing. But is it fair to say if he almost kills you, he's probably going to kill you if you don't get out? I mean, like when you think about a lot of the cases that I at least have covered, there's been a moment where it's like he almost killed you. You got to get out. And then if they go back, eventually it does end up in homicide.
That's a fair assessment.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very fair assessment. While things escalate, and then we're there to the point where he almost kills you, yes, then there's no other escalation but that.
Do you have any other questions on this case, Nicole?
Let me check.
Because I got a whole, I like my notes. I take notes on the things. And we talked about the emotionalness of it. I was like taking notes as I was writing, and then I tried to go after, because like I said, I was like, okay, she's here.
She's looking at her notes right now.
Yeah, sorry for people
that-
who aren't
right.
watching. Yeah, I guess we
In
can
the silence, we're
talk to
looking
you
at notes.
guys. I mean, I think I'm good. Do you feel like justice was ever served, even though it seemed like a very bang bang bang. Like it wasn't very. All the facts were there. We know who done it. He confessed. Do you feel like sometimes it feels like you don't get like the full wrath of your justice, not yours specifically, but the families or the family of the victims.
Or ours.
Or
I mean,
ours.
let me be
right.
real.
Yeah. Like, I feel like
I want
sometimes I'm just
justice
like,
for
but that's
her.
not enough. Like, he just gets to go to jail.
So what is justice? What is justice? And you have to think about the law enforcement side of things from what we do. So from our side, I look at it as a two-pronged approach. From our side and from a law enforcement perspective, we did everything that we could do to ensure that this case moved to the next stage and that there was a conviction in this case. We did that, and that's what occurred.
Mm-hmm.
Now, from the outside view and family and friends, of course, there's an emotional attachment there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of rage there, of anger, a lot of emotions. You know, you're on that emotional roller coaster, so you don't want the conviction. I mean, you want that person to go before the judge, and you want to hear the jury say, "We can find you guilty."
Guilty, yes.
But the results,
Hammer down.
the results are still the same.
Yeah.
So, what is justice?
Well, and so I want to say too, and I'm looking for some of the comments don't show up on the big screen, but I was looking at my page a second ago where I could see some more comments. And so I just want to say that the people that I know that knew Heather Spencer and the people that I mean, even some that commented here, Janice Rast says, Heather was the daughter of a dear friend of ours. She was so precious. This is tragic, and we'll always remember Heather. She had the most beautiful singing voice and loved the Lord with all her heart. So I think the thing is, across the board, everybody had good things to say about Heather.
Yes.
And so when Heather's Tree was started up, I think I remember talking to one of my friends that was involved, and she's like, Heather was such a light in the world. We just don't want to lose that. So I think for me, all these years of covering homicides, they're the ones where you can kind of see what happened, and here we can see what happened. You got a jerk going on who did some drugs and was evil. But it's like sometimes I look at the victim and I'm like, it shouldn't have been,
Mm-hmm.
But you also understand, and I think I'd ask you to kind of address this. Sometimes you have a victim like this that totally didn't deserve it, but in the end, the loss spurs good things. There comes beauty from the ashes.
That's true. That's true. Anytime there's a loss of life, it's tragic to the family, and especially when it evolves from violence. So we deal with those things on a daily basis. I've been in law enforcement for 25 years, and I want to say maybe 17 of those years I dealt with violent crimes.
Mm-hmm.
I remember first meeting you and you going on ride-alongs with us, and we were trying to embed ourselves in the community and talk about these things with different citizens and businesses and things of that nature. So anytime there's a loss of life, it takes a toll on the families, it takes a toll on the community. But you are correct. There are things that come about from those tragic events that can, again, some of those organizations that I'm talking about. So this organization that was created here is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Very much awesome. Sometimes when you interview for a job and they'll ask, especially in the law enforcement world, where they're asking like, name a case that you had where it was something stood out with you. I always use this case.
Yeah.
I always use this case. And I get the same emotional look that I'm getting from you right now. I always use this case. They like, wow.
Yeah.
But we put our heart and soul into it. We had a team back then that cared about what we did. And we wanted to make sure that those individuals were held accountable for their actions.
Well, and that was where I was going with it next, because, we've talked about how, you put things in a box, you have to put your emotions aside during the case and whatever like that. But one thing I know about you guys is that every one of y'all is also human. You're very good at compartmentalizing, all of you. You're very good. But when I said, hey, do you want to come on my podcast? You immediately pulled up this case. Like, this is the one.
Right.
And I have to ask, like, we've talked about how, of course, it was one of the most violent, but does this one stick out to you because you remember Like, which part of it is it that keeps it there for you?
I think it was just from the beginning, just the nature of the case itself, the individuals who helped me and worked alongside of me. Because, like I said, Eric was working on the case with me,
Yeah.
so I never forget it.
Well, and for those of you that have been listening through the podcast, you know who Eric Smith is. We've talked about him, and I can't talk about him without crying, but I'm going to try.
Oh boy.
He was one of the JPD greats,
Correct.
along with Derrick and Sheriff Jones and some of the others that we've talked to. Just a really talented, really incredible detective. He was killed inside JPD headquarters by a suicidal suspect that they were interviewing, who was able to wrestle his gun away from him. The suspect was much bigger, and killed Eric. And so that was tough for everybody. As a matter of fact, I was just talking about it today in my presentation that I gave at a public safety summit. But the point is, that's another reason that as I read it, it's like I saw Eric's name, I saw his wife Iniki's name,
She was on the crime scene.
yeah, she was on the scene too.
Right.
I mean, it's just the humans that were involved in this case make it so epic if you know anything about JPD lore. And that's kind of one of the things I wanted to bring back to you is like when Tyree was here, he said, I worked with giants. And you talk to the different guys, throughout. Every time we have a JPD guy, it's like we kind of see y'all were something special.
So I've seen some of your episodes previously. I saw you had Charlie Smith on.
Yeah.
When Tyree mentioned giants, Charlie Smith was a giant. He was our first sergeant when we came out of the academy. And you talking about a wealth of knowledge and experience. He kind of like took us under his wings and showed us things. And we contest a lot of it today to who we are based on that type of guidance that we had then. And I think that we took a lot of pride in what we did. The sheriff will tell you, I mean, we didn't like cases going unsolved. No. A case going unsolved or a case not getting or a conviction, we worked.
Yeah.
We worked. And we worked for that, not only for that family, but for us as well.
Well, and I think one thing that I felt like I had a front row to was, y'all, this makes me so emotional. It was such good days. But y'all's hearts were right out there on display. Whenever there was a case going on, it's like y'all were not going to stop until it was done. There was almost, and I know y'all had to sleep, so this is a figure of speech, but it was like almost like we're not going to sleep until it's done. And so when I think about that time in my life, it's like, and I know that JPD probably has some great detectives right now. The other thing y'all were good at was making there was no secrecy there.
Right.
It's like y'all were right out there in front. You could be seen. The cases were well publicized, and so we got to see the work you did. And to me, when I tell those old stories, I'm not saying anything at all about the guys that are working at JPD right now. I just don't know them.
Right.
And you guys, man, I mean, I really feel like y'all were movie heroes. It's like really watching like these good guys are going to get the bad guys.
That old saying, protect and serve.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to have passion for what we did, and I think that passion was our service.
Right.
Do you think you're born with it, or do you think it's?
I don't know.
You
It's
learn
almost
it.
like are you born to be a leader, or are you?
Yeah. What do you
That type
think?
question.
Yeah.
Were you
Everyone
born
is
with it?
Everyone is born, but I think you develop and you trained and you can be taught to do that. But you have to have a skill set. I mean, everyone can't be 7 feet tall,
Mm-hmm.
but they can be taught to play the game.
Right.
So
There you go. That's good.
So obviously we
That's
have a
good.
comment from your daughter. Hi, Dad.
that's my son.
Oh, your son. Sorry.
Hi, Dad.
yeah. But so, okay, when you think about the guys that are doing the job now,
Mhm.
what advice do you have?
I think now, because the element of the crimes have changed, the sophistication of the crimes have changed, the weapons that are used now have changed, the mechanisms of these weapons have changed, but also technology has changed. I think that my advice to them would be to get as much training as is available to them through the department or even on their own. I mean, I was fortunate, talk about Eric, when I told him I wanted to go to the FBI Academy for that crime scene reconstruction class, he was like, okay, go.
Yeah.
So, and when I came back and I used that information, he was like, man, I'm glad I sent you to that, But, as much training as you can, as possible. In my career, I've been blessed to have some very high level training. Like I said, I worked with the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force for 5 years, worked on cases of high level complexity that has really catapulted my career. I'm a graduate of FBI National Academy, so I've been in quantum crime. I've seen it. I've done it. Me here, where I started sitting in the seat at Jackson. So the training, have the ambition to do it, and just the passion. I said, let that passion be your service. And I think that's the best advice I could get her.
Good deal.
That's good, man.
Yep.
That's real good.
Parting thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to change the subject for a little bit.
Sure.
Something different about you. I
About
haven't
me?
seen you in a couple weeks. You have something on your wrist.
Oh, so yes, if you're watching, it's just my mom wrote me a birthday card years ago, and I found it. And of course, I've lost both my parents. My dad died in November, and my mom died in 2018. So this says, "Our beloved firstborn, we love you dearly. Love, Mom and Dad." So I just went and got it because there's a tattoo artist. He's very talented in Pearl.
Okay.
But on Fridays, he does $35 black and white tattoo. So like just, I mean, and granted, this was $85 because he has a specific kind, he has like a, he has a menu that you can choose from. This was not on it.
You can pick.
So this was $85, but it was just, it's like he's doing it. And I was getting all emotional. And at the end, he said, "Thank you for letting me do that."
Oh,
And I was like, oh my gosh.
it's really beautiful line work too.
Thank
and you
you.
did it. You
Well,
can
it
look
looks
at
just like
every
Mom's
day.
handwriting. It's like,
I
Oh,
love
wow.
it.
it's just that thing where I can, if I'm having a rough day, I can flip it over and be like, "But I am loved."
I noticed it as we were talking before the podcast, and I almost opened my big mouth, and I was like, "What is that?" And then I was like, "Wait,
Yeah.
I want to make her cry in the podcast."
Well, yeah, I was just talking to my sister. This is totally off the subject, but I was just talking to my sister
It's our
earlier.
podcast. We
And
can
I
do
was
what we
like, I said, now that we don't have anybody to disappoint, there's a part of me that's like, maybe I'll get a full sleeve. Maybe
There
I'm
you
gonna, maybe I'm
go.
gonna buy a whole bunch more
Don't.
dogs.
Derrick shaking
Maybe
his
I'm
head
gonna. There's all these different things. Like maybe I'll do that. Of course, I'm not necessarily going to, but it's like all of a sudden you have that like almost like you just got to college and you can do whatever you want. And I don't mean that in any disrespectful way to my parents at all, but you go through a lot of weird things when all your parents are gone. So when I
of
said
the-
full sleeve, I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna get biker tattoo. Not really, but
Phone a friend.
yeah.
Phone a friend.
We can
Call
get her
someone
those
first.
like sleeves
Right.
off of Amazon that people would
Right.
use for Halloween. So she can have the emotional feeling, be like, "Yeah," and then be like, "Okay, I'm better now."
Right. So enough about the phases of my life.
Yeah, right.
Derrick, any closing thoughts?
Oh no, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this story and just put on display the work that we were doing back then.
Mm-hmm. Derrick, I feel like one day the different cases that we know about, including some that have happened recently that we've had conversations about, I would love for us to just write a book. Get Tyree involved. I
Let's
feel
do
like
it.
there are so many stories to tell, and I'm grateful that you came and told this one
Let's do
because
it.
this is one I couldn't have done myself. So awesome.
Thank you.
We
Thank you.
appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Y'all do a great job of bringing it to light these stories.
Thank
I do
you.
a great job of that. I think it's a point that people need to hear, and let's not forget.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
See, and to me, the other piece that I talk about that is important is I need people to see you guys doing these things. I need them to hear those stories of y'all as well as the victims, because the world right now doesn't necessarily treat you guys with the respect I think you deserve for the work you do and the trauma you absorb and the people you save. So thank you for what you do, and thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you all for having me.
Absolutely. So, Nicole, you want to close us out with all the things?
Let's do all the things. All right. Thank you guys for joining us today. You can follow us on Facebook, on Instagram at Investigation Homicide. You can follow Therese at Therese Apel, me at Nicole Crowell. Let's see, Therese started a TikTok. TikTok's doing well, so go find us there. We post short clips of each episode, so if you just want a little bit, you can get it there. You can watch the full episode or listen to the full episode, on all of your favorite streaming platforms. If you have found yourself in a domestic violence situation, please contact the domestic violence hotline, or Heather's Tree is a wonderful resource to get you the help that you need. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, Therese and I have great contacts. Please don't put us in a sticky situation, but we can get you help.
Yes, that's right. And if you want a podcast, you can contact our podcast guy, Daniel Anderson, with Audio Alchemy. He does a great job, as you can see.
Yep.
The other thing is, if you would want to sponsor Investigation Homicide, feel free to hit us up. We would be glad to let you be a part of this podcast with us. We reach law enforcement. We reach true crime junkies all across the country. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Bye.